Hello, welcome to another episode of Wired for Growth, brought to you by Winona IT. I'm your host, Michael Pahl, president and founder of Winona IT, and in today's episode, we're going to be diving into different topics like perseverance and working through difficult circumstances with our special guest, Brad Gutwein. Brad, thank you for joining. Do you mind just taking a minute to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Michael. I'm Brad Gutwein. I'm vice president of managed services for Winona IT. I've been with the company a little over 5 years. So I'm on a leadership team with Michael. So we, meet on a weekly basis, and we really try to determine, hey, how do we lead this organization in a way that really sets us up for success? I also manage our service team. So, a lot of our guys that are taking customer complaints and tickets and really helping people out, really trying to help guide and direct them. A little bit of background for me, I actually grew up in Mexico. So my dad was a missionary, did a lot of Bible translating. So I grew up there really until I graduated high school. Then I went to Grace College here in town, graduated with an IT degree, met my wife, Corey. So we've been married since 2011, and four boys, 4 kids, all 10 and under. So they keep us quite busy. A lot of fun there. And I've really been in IT since college. So it's something I've just been in the industry for quite a while. Really enjoy it. Have a lot of fun, and the last couple of years have definitely been a really interesting experience and a lot of fun. So really excited to talk with you about it a little bit.
Let's dive into first your experience growing up in Mexico.
Sure.
I'll speak for myself. I don't really have an idea. I understand you kind of grew up in a very remote location in Mexico. I don't really have an idea of what that would even look like. Can you kind of explain that for us a bit?
Sure thing, yeah. So grew up in a remote tribal location. It was called Tohiachi. The state of Chihuahua is directly below Texas. And to get to our house, we had to drive 5 hours south from El Paso to a big city of Chihuahua. Then it was another 13-hour drive out into the middle of nowhere, literally the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
We'd park our truck, and then we had a 3-hour hike on mules and burro donkeys to get to our house.
Wow.
So no road to our house. Running water was essentially a pipe that came down from a spring upstream. Solar power for electricity.
Wow.
Very, very remote.
Wow.
So it was quite a ways out there, but really, really enjoyable because there was just nothing there. It was just very, very, very rugged.
Electricity, fresh water. Talk a little bit about how'd you get those things?
Well, the reality is my dad was pretty crazy. I mean, just knew how to do so much. So he got training. But electricity was some solar panels. So every day we would track the sun with our little movable solar panels, would capture it with a bunch of batteries. He had the house wired up for different, voltage levels. And all the outlets were labeled because you had to plug the right thing into the right outlet. Water was another one. We had a spring about 1.5 miles up the creek, and it just piped it down through a little black pipe to a little cistern we had right above our house. And
wow.
Yeah, it worked out really well. And again, my dad just knew how to maintain all that and knew how to fix it all. It was pretty crazy.
When was the last time you visited that village that you grew up in?
Last time would have been 10th grade. So I moved into the larger city for my high school years. So 9th grade on, I was in the larger city. We went back out there to visit again in 10th grade over Christmas. And so it was a quick trip. It was about 2 weeks. But we were out there for a little bit of time.
So it's been a while.
It's been a long time, yeah.
Any desire to go back to that location, or I'm sure times have changed a little bit.
No, I would love to go back to take the kids, to just take Corey, my wife. The reality is with a lot of the violence that's unfortunately happening there, very little chance to be able to go back out there. There's no current missionary presence in that location. So the work actually moved to a location a bit further away. Same group of people, but really the reality of going back out there is fairly remote at this point.
Gotcha.
So it's kind of, I don't think it'll be an opportunity at this point.
Okay, yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, growing up a missionary in Mexico, you've really seen the power of faith and community, up close. In what ways did that experience really shape your worldview, shape who you are? And do you think that continues to influence you and your decisions and leadership today?
Absolutely. Growing up with such a stark contrast between what I believe and my family believed and what was essentially believed in, by the surrounding community was pretty stark. So it helped to kind of show, hey, here's what we believe and why. We had a village witch doctor that lived, a little ways down. So they were, did all those different things. And so that definitely helped to shape and inform really what it is I believe and why. From a community standpoint, I think one of the biggest takeaways that I had is, our family unit was so tight. I mean, it was really just us. We had a couple of different partners, American missionaries that would rotate out, but the reality is it was me and my siblings and my parents, and we were our community. Obviously, we built relationships with some of the, with the people that live there, but it's different. I mean, they didn't speak English. We learned their language, but there's just it was a little different. And so, I think even to this day, with, me and my kids and my family, like we're very much like we really love each other. Obviously not to be exclusive, but it's definitely something that we value a lot.
That's great.
Yeah.
I vaguely recall a crazy story about you breaking a leg.
Oh man. Yeah.
And having to get some sort of crazy medical service, something with an airplane on a dirt runway.
Yeah.
So tell the story.
Yeah, so 6th grade year, me and my sister were up in a tree, as you do when you live out in the middle of nowhere, and the branch broke. So we were about 25 feet up.
Okay.
And so we both fell. I fell. I hit the ground. My sister landed on top of me, and my right femur, broke. I knew fairly immediately that it was broken. I looked at my leg, and it was going in a direction that didn't feel correct. So. My dad saw it. He was sitting at the house a little ways away. So he pretty immediately ran over, assessed that it looked like it was broken.
Yeah.
But again, knew how to do a splint, knew how to do traction, knew how to do all these things. There was no internet. There was no Google.
Wow.
Because of the remoteness of our location, there was one radio check-in essentially a day.
Oh, wow.
And it was, you check in the morning. Hey, we're alive. We're good. Any news? Great. So the reality is it was an afternoon type of thing. By the grace of God, two things, honestly, that I think about. When I landed, I looked over and there was a sheer root protruding from the ground that I could actually touch with my hand.
Oh, wow.
And I remember thinking if I had landed just a foot to the left, it would be, literally it would have skewered me.
Oh, wow.
So that was something that just stood out to me a lot. And then the second thing is, my dad got on the radio and is like, hey, is there anyone out there? Is there we need to call in an airplane. It takes some coordination. And it just so happened that one of the pilots was flying around and just flipped his radio on and was able to catch that. And so, they coordinated the airplane for the next day. It was about an hour flight from the main city. My dad went up and just basically talked to all the local people and said, hey, I need to carry my son to the airstrip. So the next morning, 10, 15 people showed up. They carried me on a cot up a mountain. So it was about a 3-hour hike to the airstrip.
Oh my gosh.
And it was, it was a switchbacks. It was everything you would imagine of a very rugged hike. Me on a cot going up to this airstrip. And they loaded me in the plane, flew me into town. And then the final thing that honestly was just so much God is an American doctor who spent 6 months in Colorado fixing ski accident issues was donating his time at this clinic in the city. So I got probably the best care, better care than I would have received even here in Warsaw. By this doctor that just donated his time, and so I think it was maybe $1,500 total for the entire thing. So it was remarkable.
And recovery from that type of an incident, was it quite extensive, or did he have you on your feet?
Yeah, I was on my feet in a couple months. So this would have happened in February, and we actually moved. We had a year of home assignment in the fall, and I was actually on the football team in August. Wow. So I was playing linebacker for a year. So
that's bonkers.
Youth, man, you just recover so fast. But it was truly incredible. Yeah.
Well, you've lived, cross-culturally, moving from a life of service abroad to really helping me and navigate a really busy startup. You know, how do you reconcile the values you learned through your upbringing with kind of the demands of what is admittedly a crazy startup?
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely been interesting. I would say, one thing that really stands out to me that I think has really benefited me is kind of that spirit of independence. Again, we were it. My dad, of course, just needed to know. My mom had to plan 6 months out as far as what type of food she needed to be able to fix our food because there was no grocery store. And so I do think that has helped to some degree. I'm just understanding, hey, there's not a script for this kind of thing. I mean, obviously you and I figured a lot of stuff out together. We've had some different ideas, but it's just, I think it's allowed me to be able to be confident in knowing, hey, there may not be an actual script that can be followed. A little bit of independence and just confidence that, hey, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, certainly. Tell me about another situation growing up where it was like, okay, we got to get this figured out. This was not in the script.
Yeah, I mean, again, just thinking through, we had a lot of, we had a clinic there out in the mountains. And so a lot of times folks would come in and you don't really know what to do with them.
Yeah.
So one scenario that I recall my dad recounting, I would have been much smaller, but some folks were getting a little, they got drunk, they drank a lot, and one guy actually ended up, falling off his horse and shooting himself. His gun went off, and so he showed up the next day with like a bullet wound in some part of his body. And so, that's a scenario where my dad hadn't probably treated much of that before. Opened up the how-to manual of medical things and figured out how to dig out a bullet, how to stitch the guy up, what medicine to issue him, stuff like that. So it really is, you're not really, you don't have a lot of help. You're just kind of figuring it out.
Yeah. I feel like we should cancel the podcast and just go over these crazy stories.
Yeah.
Brad, one of the questions I had for you is admittedly something I struggle with a little bit here. People ask, where are you from or where's home? I grew up in a town, Landenberg, Pennsylvania, Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, moved overseas, lived in Switzerland for a number of years, moved back to Winona Lake, Indiana.
Yeah.
And home, it feels like home is all of those things for me.
Yeah.
Having grown up outside of the U.S., were you born overseas? I forget.
No, actually, I was born in Bluffton, Indiana.
Okay,
so it's right near Fort Wayne.
Okay, all right, and then just quickly moved over. Okay, yeah. So having grown up outside of the United States and then returned here, you're deeply rooted in this community. How do you define home? Is it a location? Is it the people that are around you? What's your take on that?
Yeah, good question. It is. It's a unique circumstance. I definitely think I would define it as the people and the relationships that I have. I'm very fortunate in that a lot of people that live abroad don't have a location that they can call home. Their parents are maybe from different places of the country. Yeah. They move around a lot. They go back to different places. I was really fortunate in that we always came back to either Fort Wayne or Warsaw for home assignment. Both of my parents were actually missionaries as well. And so they were from Indiana. So I felt like there was a deep sense of connection to this location, but the reality was because that's where my family was from.
Yeah. And
so, it really is just, it's the people that really make it. And again, I've been very fortunate that we've not really had much of a geographically dispersed family unit, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's great. Brad, one of the things I've come to really appreciate about you is you seem to really be striving for continuous improvement and growing and learning. You're a husband, you're a father to 4 boys. When you wake up in the morning with kind of the mentality I know you have of continuous improvement and being a better man, where do you focus your efforts? How do you determine where to focus your efforts? And I'm going to assume it's difficult at times. How do you how do you navigate the crossroads?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that I have a strategy. I like reading, so I try to read. I listen to a lot of different podcasts from different people. One book that's really has really impacted me a lot is Atomic Habits. I'm sure you've heard of it. A lot of people have heard of it. Very, very common book. And that's really instilled in me the value of just doing something consistently better every day. It doesn't have to be I'm going from, I'm going to lose 30 pounds in a week. It's, hey, do the activities that you know are going to get you to where you want to go.
Yeah.
You've actually said the same thing to me. Hey, the score will take care of itself. Hey,
Sure.
let's do the right things right.
Yep.
Do the little things right. And so that's really kind of the basis that I try to approach it with, of
Yeah.
like, what is that one thing I'm going to start trying to do, and then I also want my kids to see that and to benefit from that.
Yeah.
So I want to be caught reading a book in the morning when they wake up.
Yeah.
So hey, every morning I'm going to get up and I'm going to make sure that I'm reading something, I'm doing something consistently. So yeah, I think the value is just what can I do consistently that over time really leads to deep change.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I appreciate you actually taught that book at Winona IT, and there was quite a few people who really ate that up, and I think it was very impactful.
Yeah.
They say kids are really great teachers. I know my kids are teaching me stuff all the time.
Yeah.
4 boys. Give us their ages again, or the oldest and youngest.
Yeah. So this month, actually, 2 of them are going to have birthdays. So Ezekiel is going to be 10 here in a couple days, and then Malachi is going to be 7.
Okay.
And then Isaiah just turned 5.
Yeah.
And then I have Josh, who's 2.5.
Yeah. So I think our 4 are actually
They
pretty
line
close.
up pretty well.
Yeah, they line up.
Yeah.
What would you say are some of the lessons that you've learned being a dad, and what have your kids taught you?
Yeah, man, so much. What one thing is just the joy of the little things.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so easy to move past stuff, but simple things like, man, the sunrise looks really, really cool today. Dad, isn't this cool? Come over and look at this in the window. And that's so cool.
Yeah.
And just I don't want to take that for granted. But there's the sense of wonder is just really, really cool.
Yeah.
Slowing down, taking time to really just focus on a thing.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about, hey, there's so much distraction. There's so much that can really take your attention away. And it's just, how do I have their view of whatever they're doing, their full attention is on that thing.
Yeah.
And that's been so impactful to me, of just, man, how do I then also learn from them and then model it back to them so that I can really, learn from that as well.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Talk to me about something that you've learned, or something you've been able to apply maybe in your personal life that you've learned working at a fast-paced startup. It's okay here to call it chaotic too. It can be chaotic. I think people get that.
Hey, I think on the chaos scale, we've gone from pretty chaotic to a little bit less chaotic.
Yeah,
That's progress.
We have, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, so something I've learned here, again, I think it's taking a lot of competing priorities, learning how to really honestly self-organize them.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying there's no help. I mean, obviously you help a lot, and there's other people that can help set priorities, but the reality is, in our environment, you have to be able to kind of self do that. And so it's prioritizing it, and then it's learning how to approach that in a meaningful way. So I really, I'm someone who kind of, once the initiative starts going, I really want to see that through.
Yeah.
And so I've had to learn how to prioritize that. So, hey, how do we approach this thing that maybe Zeke needs help with? Okay, well, let's sit down. Let's be a little more systematic about it. Let's help you get to where you want to go in a less chaotic fashion.
Yeah.
Again, versus just, everything can be crazy all the time, and it's still crazy at home. Of course, you show up and it's okay. Who's doing what toys are on the floor, all this other stuff. But it's just, okay, I can handle it. I can do it. I'm not gonna. It doesn't really ruffle me a lot. We'll just, what needs to be done, what's most important. Let's focus on that.
That's great. I'm not there yet, but that's.
I don't think I am either all the way, but it's just
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. I think a lot of people look at missionary life as tremendous sacrifice, and startup life is kind of framed as chasing ambition. How do you balance the idea of sacrificing for a greater good with pursuing, some personal goals, or even pursuing happiness in the workplace? You've maybe another way to say the same thing is you've kind of experienced both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
How do those things fit together?
Yeah, I mean, I think if, considering the idea of sacrifice, I absolutely did, kind of see, my parents especially sacrifice a lot, sacrifice, deep relationships with other people day to day, sacrifice honestly, some of the conveniences of living in a place that had a grocery store and, electricity that came to your house. So
Hot water.
Yeah. We had a hot water heater that every morning my dad would make a fire to get hot water for our house enough to take a shower. So it's just, So definitely an element of sacrifice. I see some overlaps in kind of what we're doing as well, because you do have to sacrifice a little bit of what you want to do, what you plan to do, what you think you're going to be able to accomplish that day. And you have to say, hey, listen, there's somebody else that actually may need me a little more today.
Yeah.
How many times do we get a call, or we say, hey, we were planning to do this, but we actually have to pivot and do something else.
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
I'm not the most flexible person. I kind of like knowing exactly what's going to happen.
Sure.
But I do think looking at my two experiences and understanding there's people that are going to need you regardless of what you're in.
Yep.
And really seeing the overlaps has been a really good growth experience for me.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. I do my best to talk about failing in the business world is okay. Failing fast in a startup is necessary. Brad, you're somebody who I think at first didn't love the concept of failing and failing fast. And I believe, I'm making an assumption here, but that might be linked to some of your background of servicing other people.
Yeah.
You don't want to let people down.
Yeah.
You're somebody who really likes to do a good job and likes to produce quality things. Mm-hmm. How have you been able to kind of adapt your mindset that a certain level of failure, a certain size of failure certainly is just absolutely to be expected?
Sure. No, very perceptive. And I would even say, looking back to some of my upbringing, there were several really key moments where I witnessed pretty well firsthand the negative implications of failure.
Okay.
I saw that in, several families that I really, I had really good friends with. They were, they were missionary families. One factor or another led them to having to exit the field and leave and take their family away. And so I saw very upfront, like, man, these are my friends. They failed. They did something that was, was incorrect.
Yeah.
And they're gone. And so that really deeply impacted me to this day of just, I don't want to fail. I don't want, I don't want to have this impact on my family, the people that I love and care about.
Yeah.
And so you're exactly right. It's been a journey of hey, letting go of like, I might not do it right. I might not have the right answer.
Yeah.
I think what's been really helpful is just seeing, you demonstrate that, our company demonstrate that, and just the value of saying, I didn't get it right. I don't have to get it right the first time. The implications of this are, well, we'll try it again and we'll try to do it better. Yeah. And so it's really just been understanding and seeing time after time how it's okay to not have the right answer the first time.
Yeah.
And that's really helped to just undo a lot of that, the baggage, I guess you could call it, I brought in from growing up and just witnessing, potentially a very negative experience growing up.
Well, no, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Let's air a little bit of our dirty laundry at Winona IT here. When you look back, what are maybe some of the failures that you think really helped shape your leadership or the organization, my leadership? What are some of those moments that stick out to you? I've got plenty to go to.
Failure is a good question, because I think there's been a lot of this scenarios over time. I would definitely say, honestly, you and I took a while to kind of see eye to eye, and I wouldn't again call that a failure, but I think along the way there was a lot of moments where I don't know that I was fully on board. I was very distrusting of just what is going on.
Sure.
And I remember a lot of conversations that we had where I think you were probably beating your head against the wall of like, why doesn't he just get it? And I'm like, what is going on? This is so frustrating.
Yeah.
I remember one time when we were in one of the offices, downstairs at the office, and we got to a certain point about a simple thing.
It was.
In hindsight, it was the littlest thing in the entire world.
Yeah.
And both of us ended up storming out of the office. Yeah. You took a walk, I went home, and it just was like, what are we gonna do?
Yeah.
How are we gonna see eye to eye on this type of thing? And I'm not a very emotional person in general. I don't know that I've had that type of an emotional feeling towards someone in a very long time.
Yeah.
And at the time, it felt like, did I make the wrong choice coming here?
Right.
Like, am I gonna fit? Is this what I want to do?
Yeah.
But through that, I think we both came back. Both ended up in that same room again. Had a really, really good conversation, and I think that helped to just start that. We're on the same page. We're on the same team. Yeah. It's not about me trying to, be against you, you against me, and so I think it really fortified it. So again, is that a failure? Maybe a failure of communication, I think.
Sure. A failure of communication and transparency, I feel like how I would call that moment. That was a pivotal moment for us. I do recall that. And it's funny because I think you and I have dealt with so much more than that circumstance.
Yeah.
But looking back, I really learned that one of the things that really contributed to that particular situation where you and I just really butted heads was the extent to which external factors were also kind of seeping into lack of communication and lack of making progress became clear after the fact, not during.
Yeah.
And that was a major learning experience for me.
Yeah.
That's a great example. I think that was a pivotal moment when both of us had quite a bit of a breakthrough on what are we trying to do, and we actually are way more aligned than we're making it out to be. And I think those are pivotal moments for leadership teams to go through.
Oh, you have to. I mean, because the reality is you have to know how to learn how to communicate. And I think really up to that point, and even after for a bit, we just didn't necessarily know how to communicate very well. And now I just think it's almost like second nature of like you'll send me something and I'm able to interpret it and understand what you're saying, and I hope the same way. And it's like we're past a lot of that initial struggle, and it was a huge moment.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Brad, you came from, you had worked at a different organization here in town for a number of years, 12 years, was it?
It was a little over 11.
A little over 11 years.
Yeah.
And for sure, I'm not saying better or worse, but very different work environments and circumstances. Talk to me a little bit about that transition from kind of public sector into private sector, not only just private sector, but startup private sector.
I had no clue what I was getting into.
Yeah.
So that definitely was the case. So I worked at Warsaw Community Schools here in town for a little over 11 years. Really loved my time there. Built a lot of really good relationships. I went from, help desk tech level 1 up to, technology manager, kind of in charge of several different pieces. And so, I mean, the transition was definitely not one that I ever could have anticipated. Not only was it moving to about a year-old startup at the time.
1 year.
It was about 1 year. And then that was coming right into then 2020, which obviously changed the game in a lot of different ways. So really 2 massive transitions. A couple things that stand out. One of them is that obviously the pace is so different. Public education, there is a pace to it, but it's just a very different pace. And so I really valued my time there learning how to really round out my technical acumen, my technical expertise. I was able to focus very, very deeply on learning how to grow, learning new technologies, learning how to support really well.
Yeah.
And I was able to bring that into Winona IT because, the reality is with the pace that has been on the last several years, there isn't quite as much time to really focus deeply. And so I really am thankful for that deep foundation that allows me to really just navigate a lot of these things that we've been through. So that's been one. Honestly, the value of relationships so key. I mean, it's just there's still people to this day that I'll remember from my time there 15 years ago that are still at the same place or see them like, hey, how's it been? How do you do it? Actually, one of my coworkers that was at Warsaw Schools, we have this silly meme with Megan Trainor, and every once a year we'll just shoot each other a silly YouTube video, and
that's great.
It's a simple thing, but that's something that you've really instilled in our company as well, of the value of building meaningful relationships. And it's the same regardless of the company you work at or the organization you're with. And that's just been something that I really value, and it has really kind of carried with me as well to just understand the value there.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. I think back to several of the leaders that you worked with or even under at Warsaw Community Schools. Some really great people over there. The private sector, we like to poach the best out of the public sector. But that's great. Sure. Talk a little bit just about your leadership development. I've personally witnessed you become a very confident leader, very sure of your own capabilities there. I think you have a team who's totally bought in. You and I were listening to somebody talk about C players, and I just got to thinking about what a great team you have, and I can't even really identify people like that are they're just totally on board. Talk about a little bit on how you've been able to develop your leadership capabilities in, I'd say, a very relatively short period of time.
Yeah, I would definitely say the benefit of joining a small startup company is that if you stay there long enough, you're probably going to have hired the bulk of your team.
Sure.
And so that's been a benefit of, you're not stepping into an established, group. You do get the ability to build it. We brought on our director of company culture, Scott, very early on to really lean into me, you, our team, really to round out what are the type of people that we want to bring in.
Yeah.
And so that's been huge, just the ability to really grow with the team. You start small. Now we have a much larger team, but I've been able to really adapt and grow as the team has grown as well. As far as my leadership development, I'm an observer. So I look at what other people are doing, wrong, right, whatever, and I think to myself, hey, I'm going to do that a little differently. So I've never been one that has to experience something myself to learn from it as much. There's a ton of value there. But I've really been able to observe and see. I do listen to a lot of podcasts. I try to read books. I try to just again learn something all the time as best I can. And honestly, the last thing is it's just the reps. It 5 years seems like a short amount of time, but the amount of things that I've been able to experience and do and learn and grow through has been, it feels like it's a 20-year thing.
I'm going to agree with you on that.
It's just, it's like we've had 3-a-days for 5 years, and you just learn so much. And if I was at the same place I was 5 years ago, it just what am I doing if that's the case?
For sure. No, that's great. That's great. Well, Brett, as a leader in your family and a leader at Winona IT, two questions here. I'm curious, how do you hope your sons view you as a leader when they're a bit more grown up? And then how does that contrast with how you're hoping your team really views your leadership?
Yeah, first and foremost with my sons, I really want them to see, my love for my faith, my love for my family. Those things have always been the most important thing to me, above really anything else. And so I want to make sure that they understand, I demonstrate that to them. I would really love them to be able to see that there's going to be difficult situations, but that the reality is if you follow kind of what you know is true and hold to the integrity, and you make decisions based off what you know is right. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you'll be okay with yourself. Others may make their own decisions, but the reality is if you're making the right decision based on how you think it is, that's the best that you can do. So that would be really on the home front. With the guys at the office and just in the work front, I think it's holding yourself to your standards, no matter what you're doing. We work in IT. A lot of ability to do things. Hey, I'm not going to do it at high quality. I made a mistake. I don't have to tell anybody. Nobody's going to know. There's just a lot of opportunity to do that. And so, it's just, being a leader by demonstrating that you're going to do the thing that you know is correct. And honestly, if you make a mistake, own up to it. It's just, there's really, at the end of the day, people are going to figure it out at some point. And it's just being true to yourself. And I think that's what's really important.
No, that's great. I know doubt is something you and I have talked a lot about. It's really easy to doubt yourself or doubt that you're up to a really difficult challenge. You and I have handled some very difficult challenges together. We've got a couple right now. I think in the spiritual world, doubt can sometimes be perceived as a weakness, but in the workplace, we're trying to kind of embrace doubt as part of personal growth. How would you say your view of doubt has been shaped over the last several years?
So I tend to be an eternal optimist. I am a glass half full type of person.
Definitely.
So, something happens and I tend to probably have a little more rosier opinion of something than I potentially should. So I guess in one aspect I've seen, maybe more, I don't know if cynical is the right word, but maybe a little more perceptive folks like you or even other people that might look at the same situation and perceive a difference. And I've really tried to embrace that and just understand, hey, there are positives and there's benefit to that, but let's let's have a little bit of perceptiveness and see maybe there is another side of that. And so that's part of it. I think self-doubt is another one that's something I'm really trying to think through what that means to me. Growing up, again, really independent. So there's a pretty high level of, like my dad is saying, hey, what could possibly go wrong? And it's really just, we're going to get it figured out. Yeah. And so I think there's a good level of that, but I'm trying to just learn, hey, there is value in doubting that I'm going to be able to do it by myself, I guess is what I would say.
Sure.
Collaborating with others, asking for help. And I think that takes some humility that I don't necessarily naturally possess all the time. Do I doubt myself a lot? I don't necessarily. I've never been a cynical person necessarily, and so I've had several situations where I've had questions about my faith, but I've never been to the point of like, okay, I doubt where I'm at. Yeah. And so again, I think that there's a part of me that I really want to think deeply about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I want to make sure that what I believe is truly strong. And I do think that would require a little bit more doubt on my part besides just, well, that's just what I get told. And let's, have a glass half full approach. So
that's great.
Yeah.
With 4 boys at home.
Yeah.
That's quite demanding. You've got a lot of responsibilities at work that demand a lot of you.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you're able to stay present in the moment? Would Corey say you're able to stay present in the moment?
Is she next on this one? I don't know. I don't know if I can handle that.
She's not. And if you would say you do at least a decent job of that, what would be some guidance and tips you would give somebody? I think you do this really well.
Yeah, it's not always been the case. I would say definitely one of my biggest, and you mentioned earlier, hey, how are some things that I try to be a little bit better? One of the biggest focus areas that I had really for myself last year was that area of focus, of, I don't know if compartmentalizing is the right word, but just how do I be present where I am? Mm-hmm. So I feel like honestly, even the last several months of last year and going into this year, I really feel like I've gotten to a place where I can really focus on what I need to focus on, but not carry that into when I get home.
Yeah.
I read a book at the end of last year. It was called Deep Work, and the whole idea was, hey, we distract ourselves with so much that we're rarely able to just focus on. This is what needs to be focused on. Yeah. And then you naturally carry that into I get home and I'm thinking about these questions, and then so one of the really key benefits is to just make things as simple as possible. I don't know how tangible you want to go, but things like, there's no email in my inbox for more than 2 days.
Yeah.
It gets sent somewhere, it's gone. The clutter, it drives me nuts. And so I worked really hard to do that. I came up with, systems of, hey, I'm driving home. Well, that's when it's quiet. So that's when I think about a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, instead of pulling over to the side and writing stuff down or crashing into something, I have an app that I just dictate into my, so just to capture those things. And then it's almost like those aren't on my brain anymore. Mm-hmm. And that just allows me to then get home and it's, hey, can I show you this thing I made at school? Hey, look at the sunset. Hey, can you build these Legos? And I'm not just constantly thinking about this type of thing. Yeah. And so, I've really benefited from that. And it's just made me a much more attuned person and a father. And it's really been beneficial because you are right. There's so many things that grab your attention at work and not. Yeah. That if I didn't do that, I don't know how I would be able to keep it ahead of it.
Yeah, no, that's great. I jokingly refer to you as the only person in the organization without attention deficit disorder. So you do a good job with that.
Yeah.
Brad, I would say, I don't know if you'd agree with this entirely, but I would say from my perspective, there was a point in time several years ago, where a different Brad just showed up to work one day, and you were really deeply committed. Yeah. And I saw a change in you where you almost took like an extreme ownership, and it's hard to even explain, but you were all in.
Yeah.
What caused that shift for you? What caused you to just take extreme ownership and really be as committed as you are? And I know you're a loyal person. Mm-hmm. That was one thing that through the interview process, people repeatedly told me, Brad is one of the most loyal people I know. So it's not about loyalty, but just the the extreme commitment that you've made. What really caused that decision?
Yeah, again, I think it was like a journey, of course. You're very right. I am very loyal.
Yeah.
And so as part of that, I do tend to be a little bit slower to commit to things because I do know that about myself. And that once the train starts moving, I'm not going to jump off of it at times until it's crashed off the cliff. And so I do defend myself a little bit, and I am hesitant to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it really is just, a couple factors. Again, I think what we talked about earlier, you and I understanding each other a lot better, just understanding how to communicate. We're both on the same team. I remember coming in initially, a lot of it felt like, hey, I feel like I'm the opposite. And it's like, hey, you want to do these things over here. I want to do these things over here.
Yeah.
And we're just going to butt heads about it. And we're going to fight about it.
Yeah.
And it's just understanding, again, through, I think like reps and just doing so many things, seeing that the reality is, I can trust you. You can trust me.
Yeah.
We both want the same thing. That was huge.
Yeah.
Trust in your leadership, your organization, that we both want the same thing.
Yeah.
And then I really think your trust in me to own, honestly, a large part of what your vision was.
Yeah.
I mean, to hand off, I manage our service team. So really, they're the guys that are on the front lines. They're getting the tickets. They're getting the calls. They're the ones that the customers are interacting with on a day-to-day basis.
Right,
and that's a huge responsibility. And so I think your trust in me to own that and to feel confident that, hey, I can trust this guy to not tick off our customers, to get it.
Yeah.
There's an it factor that just takes so long to understand. But I think feeling that you trusted me and had confidence in me was a huge part of it as well. And the last thing I would say is from the beginning, being involved. I'm a big picture guy, so I really value just understanding the context of everything. And so you tell me to do something, I may struggle with that a little bit if I don't understand how that relates. But once I know that, then I'll be able to do it. And
for sure,
being able to just work through some of that with you, sitting down and saying, hey, we need a mission, we need a vision, we need core values. I was able to walk through that, do that with you, really help to put those together. And that crystallized it because I can look at that and say, hey, I remember sitting down. I remember where we were when we came up with that.
Yeah.
I remember going back and forth about, do we have honor God in our, in this or not?
Right.
And it's just, so really being able to participate in that, just, man, it through the roof of like buy-in because it felt a little more personal, a little more ownership for me. And that was really unique. Again, coming from a large organization, you have a little bit, and it's not that it doesn't matter, but there's so many other pieces to it.
Yeah.
And so that was such a unique experience that I've not had the opportunity to do in other places.
No, that's great. I remember a lot of that time.
Yeah.
I do remember us in the conference room talking about the core values, the mission, and you're right. I think that helped demystify some where I was coming from. You mentioned handoff of the service unit of our business. That honestly, looking back, is one of the most difficult things I've ever done because that was like my baby.
That was it. Yep.
And that was my background. My background was somebody who had worked in customer service my whole life and really cared deeply about people's experience. And
do you remember, one thing stands out, do you remember, I remember calling you, I was driving here in town, and I remember calling you, and I think I said something like, hey, can you please stop calling my guys and just asking them to do stuff? Like, can you just, because it was almost this dynamic of like, okay, who's in charge here? And I just, it was such a quick conversation.
Yeah.
But I remember both of us were kind of like, yeah, we probably should think about this a little differently.
Yeah.
But it took that time, and I could definitely see how much you care so much about it.
Yeah.
But it was like, again, it wasn't like all right, now moving forward, but it was just kind of this process.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I think walking through that process with you had its not great times, but ultimately we've had a tremendous breakthrough there over the years, and it's in great shape. And you're right, it is the customer service facing part of our business. Yeah. It's the part that really caused me to even start the business, was wanting people to have that great experience. Something we care a whole lot about.
Yeah. Yeah.
What else comes to mind, Brad, when you think about events or times at Winona IT that have really shaped things? We talked about, you and I in the conference room slamming our heads against the table and storming out. What else comes to mind?
Yeah, another incident is another situation is I remember coming back from a vacation to essentially a 2 weeks notice on one of our key employees, and I came back to essentially something printed out on my desk, and it was at a time when we were really like we just had so much going on. We truly did.
Why'd you take vacation?
I don't know. You approved it, so it's gotta go on an anniversary trip every now and then.
Every now and then, I guess.
But again, coming back from just this refreshing time, it had been the summer was just so busy. There was a lot going on. We were still trying to figure out kind of how do we get from this like really small team to then actually start taking on much bigger things.
Yeah.
And I remember coming back to that, and it was like a gut punch because it was just one of those like, what are we gonna do? And I remember sitting down with you, and we talked about it, and I remember a key piece coming out of it is, hey, let's take a little bit of risks. Let's try to get ahead of it. Let's try to, again, I think that fear of failure in me was like, I don't know if I want to do that. But you were like, hey, let's do it. Let's try to get ahead of it. Let's try to hire ahead of the contract a little bit so that we can be ready for this versus feeling like we're behind the whole time.
Yeah.
And again, going through that, it was very challenging. It was very hard to, hey, stand in front of the team and say, team, we're going to have some changes here that, we're losing a key part, but I'm confident that we're going to be able to go. And we've certainly had, similar things, but it's really, that was kind of the start of just understanding, for me, honestly, the nature of business, and that at the end of the day, like there are going to be these things that happen.
Oh yeah.
And how to navigate them is the key. And really how to have confidence with your team to say, hey, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Like this is going to be a little hard, but let's rally together. Yep. Let's get through this, and we'll be stronger on the other side.
No, that's great. That's perfect. Yeah. That was a tough time. You know, I think that was such a pivotal time. I would even say this, that resignation and the weight that we've both felt really shaped the next several years in a major way.
Definitely.
That was a pivotal point for us. Yeah. I think we got our act together on some things we weren't doing very well.
Yep.
And I think we also learned that we can overcome things that really feel like maybe we can't in the moment. And I think it built our confidence overall to navigate through that.
Yeah.
Up until that point, we had very low turnover on key positions. We still have extraordinarily low turnover compared to the market, but that was a pivotal time for sure.
And I think it was so like I guess it kind of reminded me that the reality is like you don't necessarily know, because it was one of those things where, I knew everybody was busy, but I don't think either of us really had an idea of anybody signaling like, hey, I want out. It was one of those things where it just helped remind like, hey, this does happen, but the reality is we can move past this.
Yeah.
And that was so important.
Yeah. Brad, I know you've got quite a supportive family, and I think Corey has been somebody who's provided you a ton of support through the last 6 years of navigating difficult work experience, really difficult boss. Just talk to me a little bit about that. I mean, I think she's played a pivotal role in your growth over the last couple of years from my perspective, and somebody that you can decompress with. And
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, she's been my number one supporter, my number one ear to talk about what I need to, and always understanding and willing. The things that I've learned at home have translated here, and at Winona IT back and forth. We talk about everything. Sometimes we're tired at the end of the day. It's obviously gets to be quite a lot when you have a full day and then the kids go down, but we always understand if one or the other of us needs to talk, we make time for it.
Yeah.
I would say she's definitely someone who pushes me out of my comfort zone, and that's it's in a good way. Yeah. Again, you would be someone similar to that of like, I tend to just get focused and moving, and I move in the direction I'm moving in until I'm told otherwise, and sometimes I need to be fairly violently taken out of that path. Sure. And she's done a really good job of knowing when to say, hey, I think it's time to start thinking about something different. She was a big proponent of me even coming to Winona IT, and to begin with, she was like, hey, I see that you love what you're doing, but I see a lot of potential that you just may not get to experience where you're at.
Yeah.
And so really without her, really kind of guidance and even just that encouragement, I don't even know if I would have made a change.
Okay, sure.
I tend to be a creature of habit. I tend to just keep doing what I know.
And very loyal. I mean, you're very
loyalty.
loyal.
Yes, loyalty is a huge thing to me.
Yeah.
And so, she's been so critical in saying, hey, you're not being disloyal. You're not, compromising this thing by making this change, by going out on a limb, by trying something different.
Yeah.
And so that's just paired really well with, again, everything is different here. I mean, it's just, you never really know what you're going to have to do on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. And so just the flexibility that she's helped me learn to be better at being flexible has been invaluable.
That's great.
Yeah.
Brad, I think one of the things you've done extremely well is you've brought compassion into a pretty high-stakes environment at Winona IT without it docking or hurting our competitive edge.
Sure.
And that's something that I think you're really gifted at. Some of that compassion, I think, comes from your background and your upbringing.
Sure.
Talk to me a little bit about your emphasis on that piece of your leadership and just I'll give you an example. You go to bat for your team like no one I've really ever seen before. Where does that come from?
Sure. Yeah, I think by nature I'm a people pleaser, and so at my core, a lot of times to my detriment, I really, really care very, very deeply about what people think and care, which I think is a real positive. Mm-hmm. And so I do take that into the team, and I try to put myself in the other person's shoes as much as I can.
Yeah.
Hey, what would I feel were I in this situation?
Yeah.
What would I want my manager to say? What would I want my friend to say? What would I want my colleague to do in this situation? So that's been really helpful to just try and, again, put myself in somebody else's shoes. And then the other thing I'm really trying to be better on is, it's part of being compassionate and caring about people is being willing to tell them when they need to do something different.
Yeah.
And that's been a part of my personality that has never been very strong. Again, I tend to be more of a conflict avoider by nature. Yeah. But I've really, really come to understand the value of it's actually being the opposite of compassionate to not tell someone, hey, you're not meeting expectations. Mm-hmm. Hey, you're not, to let them down softly. There's a way to do it in a compassionate way, but being willing to have a hard conversation with somebody is so critical. Yeah. And that's been a piece that I'm really working hard on, and I think it's probably one of the things I've probably struggled the most to truly understand how to do that.
Well, I was going to say, I guess it's related, but I was going to say that's probably the area that I've seen the most growth in you over the last, especially the last probably 2 years, is I think you had a breakthrough working on several instances where you were able to see firsthand that supporting them was helping them realize they weren't on the right track.
Yeah.
And that's one of the most difficult things in business to get right.
Yeah.
I can sometimes arrive there too early or a little bit too direct in my dealing with that. And then I think to your point quite a while ago, you'd actually rather take that person's responsibilities on your own back versus
you're right.
walk them through it.
Yeah.
But I think you've made tremendous adjustments there.
Yeah.
That's great. Brad, from my understanding, missionary life, it can really involve a lot of hardships. Startup life is a lot of stress. Mm-hmm. How do you kind of cultivate endurance to keep going through really difficult times? And I guess more specifically, we've referenced several times today a really hard time that you and I went through. And where did some of your endurance and desire to persevere through those hard times, where does that come from?
Yeah, good question. I think part of it is just knowing where I'm at my core, knowing that what I do doesn't define me, it's who I am. And that's really key because you can let a lot of external circumstances that the reality is you have no control over define you. Yeah. You have to make decisions, you have to figure things out, but it doesn't define who you are. And so it's just understanding, you know what, at the end of the day, there's going to be another day. Mm-hmm. We're going to get through it. We'll be able to work through it and just being kind of having that trust that, you know what, again, kind of like we talked about earlier, if I make the best decision that I know how to make based on what I think is true, that's the best I can do. Yeah. And so it's really just acknowledging, who I am, my value comes from, my faith, the relationships I have, my family, letting that inform it, you can really take on a lot of external stress.
Yeah.
Obviously, it impacts me. I'm not the most stress-free guy in the entire world, but
Sure.
just trying to know that, we are going to get through it. And then again, even especially here at Winona IT, just having experienced so many things, there is a confidence in just knowing this is a stressful situation, but it's similar to that one we had a couple months ago, and this is what we did to get through it.
Yeah.
And so that it does give you a growing confidence to be able to navigate those type of things.
And not only did we get through it, but man, we learned a lot, and we were all the better
Exactly.
for having gone through it.
And
right?
applying what you learned to do it better next time.
For
That's
sure.
that's so critical.
Last question I have here for you is I just want to talk about some of your hopes and some things that have you excited, whether it's at home with your family or in the workplace. Like, what are some things that you're really looking forward to? What are some hopes of yours to develop here in the coming years?
Yeah, on the home front, I'm really looking forward to, I have 4 boys. We're almost out of the baby phase, and so I love traveling. And obviously, we've had very young kids at home for a good chunk of time, and so I'm really excited to be able to give my kids some of the experience I had. I know it won't be the same. You would admit the same thing. It's different when you're living somewhere, of course, but just being able to get a little bit of a different perspective and just, taking mission trips together, going to visit places together, just doing things kind of outside of our bubble. I'm very excited about that, and just being able to, we don't have to pack a pack and play whenever we travel anymore.
Yeah.
It's just, those are the things I'm really excited about. And then doing things with my boys that are, teenage boy things. Just, hey, I'm learning to have a relationship with you more as a man versus a child, and that's just really excited about that. I love my own dad. I have great respect for him, and so getting to kind of get into that next phase is really exciting for me.
That's great.
On the work front, I think it's similar. It's the next phase. It's, hey, we're, I don't know if we're on the cusp, we're in the cusp. I'm not sure, but it feels like we're at this point of like, are we going to take it to kind of that next tier? Like we started small, we got to medium. How do we then take what we know works really well and apply that to the next thing and build into people, build into our staff and the team, and say, man, this is something that, hey, if you and I take off for a month and we're, out in the middle of nowhere, things go on, and we're able to just repeat that. And that's what's really exciting, is to really take what I've learned and just say, hey, how can we instill that in the folks to keep moving forward?
Well, that's great. That's great. Brad, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here today. Great conversation. Appreciate everything you're doing for us. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on today's episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe to our podcast and connect with us on Facebook and LinkedIn. We look forward to having you with us again next time.